Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TTT2 Passing the Torch. I am Elisabeth Sporer, founder of SOARC Business Strategy Consulting, and I'm very excited you're here today. I've spent over 25 years in this industry, running firms, building teams, and yes, making every mistake you can imagine when it comes to growth planning. So everything we're covering today comes from real experience, mine and the 50 plus A&D firms I am and have been working with. You can see here I issue monthly newsletters, and if you don't receive it yet, please sign up via my website. There is the QR link on screen. And I have been holding well over 20 events, probably closer to 30 at this point, about any issues related to running an A&D business. So we have about 30 to 45 minutes or 45 minutes to an hour to dig together. So we'll move through 5 parts, starting with a quick look at where your firm stands right now. Then a structured look at what most firms often gets in the way, or what gets in the way for most firms. Then the actual transition pathways available to you. And before we close, we'll look at 2 case studies, 2 very different firms, 2 very different plans. And I'll leave time for your next move, and of course for questions. I'll be asking questions and inviting hands and comments all the way along. So it's not just a one-way presentation. In my experience, A&D leaders tend to fall for one or both of the listed topics. The first one is the torch doesn't pass itself. Most founders know they need to think about this. Very few have actually started. The gap between knowing and doing is where firms get into trouble. And the second one is that most transitions happen too late. Not by a little, by years. And by the time the urgency is felt, the options have already narrowed. And what we're doing today is creating a little productive discomfort so people leave with a reason to act. So where is your firm in its life cycle right now? Why don't you think about that and take note? You don't have to share it, but we will come back to that. So where are you? Where is your firm at right now?
I'm sorry, could you, oh, I see. Now you're going to talk about the state of the firm. I was like, am I making that up? Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can be as a lead, you can be an owner or you can be an employee. It goes both ways. So yeah, I walk you through the details right now. So I ask you to score your firm honestly on 3 dimensions. This is for you and not to, you don't share it yet. You may share later on. And I walk you through, briefly through it. So there is the founder dependency. This is the most common issue I see. The founder is still the hub of everything. Every client relationship, every key decision, every proposal. If you scored yourself a 1 or 2, you're in a majority. That's not a failure. It's a starting point. So score between 1 and 5, 5 being top, 1 being low, of course. The second one is the financial transferability. So revenues that are tied to your relationships is not the same as firm value. A buyer, and whether that's an internal successor or an outside party, is buying a system and not a person. If all what value walks out the door with you, there's nothing to transfer. It is a matter of brand, creating a brand and maintaining the brand. And then there's the leadership depth, the third one. Is there someone in your firm who could run a client meeting, make a hiring decision, or close a project without you? If not, that's where you need to focus on. So let's elevate the conversation from when I retire to what does a real transition require? So let's look at the goals. What do you actually want from this? Is it a full financial exit? Is it about legacy preservation? Do you want to stay involved creatively? So these aren't the same answer, and they lead to very different paths. Then the timeline. 10 years sounds like a long time. It's not. Not if you're starting from zero, and most people are starting from zero. Then there's the financial health. A firm that's founder dependent can still have solid financials. But if the revenue only exists because of your relationships, a buyer will discount it heavily. The financials need to tell a story that survives your absence. And let's look at market position as well. What's your firm known for? And can that reputation be carried by someone other than you? If not, that's something we need to build before the transition and not after. Now we're at the diagnostic heart of the workshop. What stands between your firm and a successful transition? Most common, I see one or more of the following 4 threats. One being the candidate gap. The bench is thin or invisible. Often the issue isn't that no one exists. It's that no one has been named, or no one has been told, or no one has been given a real chance to prove themselves. Another one is skill readiness. Architecture and design firms develop excellent designers. They rarely develop excellent business leaders. BD, financial management, client negotiation, people management, these are almost never taught intentionally inside firms. And you can't expect someone to step into ownership if they've never been asked to do the work of an owner. And then there is the no visible path topic. This is the one that surprises founders most. They look around and see people who seem uninterested in leadership. But in my experience, no interest usually means no visible path. If the path to ownership is unclear in terms of timeline, financials, and what it actually requires, strong candidates will quietly disengage. Not necessarily because they don't want to grow, because the offer doesn't look worth it. And there is the last topic, the conversation not had. Most succession planning fails before it starts because the real conversation about money, about control, and about timing never happens. So principals may drop hints, associates wait for clarity, and nothing moves. The antidote is a direct, specific conversation. I see you as a future owner. Here's what that would look like. Here is what it would require of you. Please notice which one of these feel most familiar to you. Now let's look at your firms. Which threat is most alive in your firm right now? And I ask you now to raise a hand if it applies to you. So who in the room has named a successor, even tentatively, and told them? Raise your hand, please. John, thank you. I think Jeanne mentioned that before. Okay. All right, thank you. Um, can one of you share maybe what that conversation was like, or what it felt like, what came out of it? We can come back later to that. So the next one is, who has had an honest conversation with their principal about a path to ownership? Raise your hand, please. I see one, thank you. Awesome. Good. Okay, so some conversations happen. I am very happy to hear that. I'm very, very happy to hear that. So Frustration that hasn't happened yet in your firms, and what is in the way? Is anybody willing to share some thoughts on that?
Nobody wants to take over leadership.
Ah, I see. I hear that a lot.
There's not an entrepreneur in the bunch.
But I know of a legacy firm with a 30-year history and several people with titles such as associate principal and senior associate. None of these designated future leaders has been asked to take on real leadership, nor have they been informed when this transition may happen or at what cost. So I call this an invisible path. And I hear that actually quite a few times when I work with firms. Because you have to define what you have to give up and delegate leadership and start with pieces, parts. And you have to step away and let them make, to some extent, mistakes, I guess, too. So no desire almost always means no visible path. Before you conclude someone isn't interested, ask yourself, what have you made leadership look like from where you sit for whoever is you are talking to and want to talk to. Now that we've looked honestly at where most firms get stuck, let's look at the actual path available, because the work of transition planning is to match your situation to the right option, not to assume there's only one way out. So here's an overview of the most common routes, and I'll go deeper on ESOP and EOT in the next slide and on viability conditions in the one after. So there's always closed doors. This is a real option and worth naming, a planned wind down. And it's not a failure, it's a decision. A failure would be if you wind down without having planned for it. It's not listed as one of the three. It's less common, in all honesty. The internal sale, that's the most common pathway in A&D and the most underprepared for. Because the successor may exist, but the structure may not exist. But that is fixable. It does take time though. Then there is the external sale. It requires a buyer who values what you've built, not just the revenue, but the culture and the client relationships. So the cultural fit is the variable that kills a lot of these deals. And then there is the merger, two firms becoming one. The operational complexity is real, but so is the strategic upside, especially for a firm that needs capacity it cannot build from within. One of my clients went through a merger in the last 10 years from a small firm to a very large international firm, and it has been very successful, very rewarding for both sides. And then there is the ESOP and the EOT, so employee ownership in two flavors. One is for the larger firms and one for the smaller firms. So we'll look at this more closely in the next slide. ESOP and EOT are both employee ownership transition plans. ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan, and EOT stands for Employee Ownership Trust. So most A&D practitioners have heard of ESOPs, but don't know they're usually out of reach for boutique firms, and fewer have heard of EOTs at all. So here are the key points. So the ESOP is for larger firms. The debt structure and transaction costs, typically between 50 and 150,000 just to set them up, make it impractical for firms under 20 people or less than 2 million in revenues. So that rules out a lot of the boutique A&D practices. The EOT is the emerging alternative. An employee ownership trust holds shares on behalf of employees through a trust structure. No individual equity stakes, no complex loan structure. It is simpler, has a lower cost, and is more accessible for small firms. It's been used extensively in the UK and is gaining traction in the US. If you're running a 5 to 15 person firm and want to preserve culture and distribute ownership, that is worth looking at and knowing about. If you have more questions, I'm more than happy to have a follow-up clarity call, and I give you more instructions on that at the end. So let's connect the transition pathways to the conditions that make each one work. So the internal sale, the most important condition is time. If you're 3 years from wanting to retire and your successors have never made a business decision, the internal sale is not realistic yet. If you have 7 to 10 years, it absolutely is. The external sale and merger. The number one mistake I see firms going to market without, the number one mistake I see is that firms going to market without knowing what they're worth and without having done the work to make themselves transferable. So a buyer is not going to discount the founder dependency problem away. You have to solve it before you sell. The ESOP and EIT, these work best when the firm is already running well without the founder at the center. If you're founder dependent, an employee ownership structure doesn't fix that. It just changes who owns the problem. So based on what you've heard so far, which of these pathways feels most relevant to where your firm is right now? Now let's look at the timeline. This is often the slide that lands hardest. It is the honest version of the timeline. 5 to 10 years from start to finish. And that's if you start with clarity on your goals. Phase 1 alone, the assessment can take 6 months to 2 years because getting principals to agree on what they want is harder than it sounds. So the phase 1 assess needs, that is the work most firms skip or shortchange. What do you want and when? What does the firm need to look like for that to be possible? These questions take longer to answer than you'd expect. In particular, when 2 or more principals have slightly different answers. The phase 2 list options. Once you know what you want, you can evaluate which pathway fits. You can't do this in reverse. The pathway has to serve the goal and not the other way around. And then the phase 3, focus on details. This is where the valuation happens, where the roadmap gets built, where the pro forma for the transition gets modeled. It's also where most firms realize they need outside help. So in phase 4, you hire consultants, attorneys, CPA, and depending on the pathway, a business broker or an merchant acquisition advisor. This is not optional for anything other than the simplest internal transfers. And then the phase 5, the execution, which takes 2 to 5 years. The plan is in place. Now you're living it, transferring authority, relationships, and equity on a defined schedule. So phase 1 to 4 take 1.5 to 4 years, with the execution another 2 to 5 years. That's why you end up easily with a 10-year plan, realistically, for execution. The firms that get this right are the ones that start before they feel urgent about it. Urgency will not make it better. So we've covered a lot of ground: the threats, the pathways, and the timeline. All of it is only useful if it changes something you do next. So I want to give you 2 minutes to be specific. And you don't share it, you just write it down for yourself. Name one decision you have been deferring, just one. And a follow-up question is, what is the first concrete step you could take in the next 90 days? Write that also down. If you're comfortable, please share with us via the chat. I would like to get a sense of what commitments you are making or have been making that might go beyond this meeting. Oh, I like that. They're deliberately asking a former employee working for a competitor if they have interest in buying the firm. Okay, all right. Any other offers? Okay, never mind. You can keep that to yourself, but I want you to encourage, do take it serious and do the one thing that you decided that should happen within the next 90 days. And again, if you would like to have a conversation one-on-one, you can schedule a clarity call with me as a follow-up. So I want to leave you with two examples. They're not hypotheticals, but composites drawn from firms I have worked with or am working with. Two very different situations, two very different plans, and see if either one looks familiar to you. Firm A has 20 staff, 2 owners, a 10-year horizon, a proactive plan. They have time, they have staff with potential, but BD and design leadership are both still locked with the principals. This is the good start, real work to do scenario, because the timeline does allow for training up. Firm B has 4 staff, 1 owner, 2 designated successors who are willing and able. The owner is ready to let go gradually. The successors need to learn the business side of practice. This one is about building the right structure for a staged handoff. As you can see, the plan has to match the situation. There's no one-size transition. So let's look closer at Firm A and where they stand. On the founder dependency, they scored a 5, 2 of 5. The 2 owners are still the center of gravity. Every key client relationship, every significant design decision, it flows through them. The staff are skilled, but they haven't been invited into the leadership layer yet. On the financial transferability, they score at a 3 of 5. The firm has revenue beyond just the principal's relationships, which is good. But the revenue isn't yet systematized. The value exists, it just needs to be institutionalized. Again, working on the brand and everybody that is working in the firm. We go into more detail at that in a few slides. The leadership depth scores at a 2 of 5. There is a senior staff member who has real potential, and there are capable mid-level people, but none of them have been given real leadership authority. They've been contributors, not decision makers. The good news is that they have 10 years and they're being intentional about it. That's a very different position than a firm that waits until retirement is 6 months away. This plan is achievable, but both tracks have to start now. So I'll walk you through the 4 phases of the 10-year transition plan at a high level. I will not read every bullet and rather highlight the logic of sequencing. So in years 1 and 2, it's about assess and structure. Before you can develop anyone, you need to know what you're developing them for. So valuation needs to happen, then a clear conversation with the successor candidates. We see you. Here's what we're building toward. and a legal framework that makes the ownership transfer possible. Then in the years 3 to 5, you develop the leadership. This is where the real work begins. The senior staff members get a real title with real authority, not honorary. Mid-level staff start leading projects end to end. The owners show up to client meetings alongside successors, not instead of them. And then in the years 6 to 8, the transfer of authority happens. The owners start to recede from operations. The successors are running things. The first equity transfer happens. This is also when you find out if the plan is working. You'll know by whether the clients are following the successors or still calling the principals directly. And in the years 9 to 10, you execute the exit. So the majority of equity transfers happens then. The owners retire. The firm continues on a new ownership with the legacy and culture intact. This is an optimistic plan that requires consistent follow-through over a long period. The biggest risk is that it gets deprioritized in busy years. Annual reviews of the plan need to be built in. That's what keeps it alive. Out of experience working with that firm, even narrowing down the names to who are they really is an ongoing process that is not set in stone and seems to move. And the risk of staff getting too busy on projects rather than getting trained is a real one that I see happening consistently and repeatedly, unfortunately. This slide is the most operational of the Firm A section. It shows what development actually looks like in practice, not just we'll mentor them, but what that means year by year. Neither track can wait for the other. Both must begin in year 1. I see firms all the time where the design leadership is strong, but the BD is still locked in the principles. And the successor candidates have no idea how to bring it in work. But that's not succession, that's a dependency transfer. So the BD track. The progression here is deliberate. They shadow first, then they co-lead, then they lead independently, and then originate. You cannot skip steps. And the owners have to be willing to be in the room as a supporting presence, not the lead voice. And then on the design leadership track, same progression. Internal reviews first, where the owners can give feedback privately, and then presenting to clients alongside the owners, and then setting direction, and then full creative leadership. The owners become advisors, not decision makers. So which of these tracks do you think is harder to develop in most A&D firms? I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Is it harder to develop BD or design leadership?
I know in our firm, it's the BD.
Okay.
BD, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, business development.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess we get trained to design to some extent in architecture school, and you develop that to some extent also as you work, but business development is really something you have to commit yourself to doing, I guess.
So
I do see also firms though that need real training on the design leadership. I
Yeah.
see them both equal at this point, working with the firms I am working with at this point. But interesting to hear. Thank you for sharing.
I find that I have the BD gifting and not the architectural background, so that might add more value to my sale as long as I'm willing to stay engaged on the BD side. I'm happy to give up the design side.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks. All right.
Elisabeth, from your perspective, are there more? It seems to me there's more designers than people that can make it rain.
Absolutely, yes. In the bigger picture, totally. The business acumen or the business side is not developed in A&D firms. In my experience, though, the ones that do make it to the leadership, yes, they have an affinity of some kind to it. And some of it can be literally trained. It's more like making it a commitment of the leaders and of the next generation that comes into it, because not everybody is an outgoing personality. I understand that. But you can do business development if you're not as outgoing just as much. There are ways to work with that and develop systems around it. Let's look at firm B briefly too. So firm B is in a genuinely good position, not because the transition is easy, but because the key ingredients are already in place. There are two people who want to lead, who are developing their credentials, and whose owner is ready to let go. That's not as common as you'd think. On the founder dependency, that firm scores a 3 out of 5. The owner is still the center of BD and client relationships, but the pattern is beginning to change. Delegation has started. It's not systematic yet, but the intention is there. On the financial transferability, the firm also scores a 3 out of 5. A 4-person firm has manageable overhead. The value is real, but it needs to be formalized through a valuation before an equity conversation can be specific. You can't negotiate a price you haven't calculated. On the leadership depth side, the firm scores a 4 out of 5. There are two capable people, licensure underway, willingness confirmed. The training is the gap, and training is the most solvable problem in this room. The plan here isn't about building what is missing, it's about building the structure around what's already there. So the ingredients exist. The question is how to sequence the handoff. So I'll walk you through the 4 phases of a 10-year staged transfer with a deliberate structure of equity split and what it means for governance. So in years 1 through 4, build the leaders. Before any equity moves, the successors need to be able to run the firm. That means completing licensure, leading projects end to end, beginning to develop their own client relationships, and understanding the financials. The valuation also happens in this phase, so there are no surprises when year 5 comes. Year 5 is the first equity transfer. Up to 49% combined in this case, roughly 24.5% each. The owner retains 51% and majority control. Seller financing is the most common structure for small firms. The successors don't need to come up with the cash all at once. The firm's future profits pay for the transition. And then years 6 to 9, shared leadership.
Sorry, Elizabeth, is that typically like a loan is taken out by the company and then paid back by the future company, essentially?
It's basically a loan to the future, to the leaders for a very limited time that they pay back once they receive basically profits. Yes.
Okay. Is that loan coming from a third party or from the original principal?
I have seen it through the originating principal with one of my clients, and it works really well for them.
Uh-huh.
But I think you could also structure it through a bank if you want to.
Okay.
John, we have something where we have one original founder and then 4 partners. We each have a capital account and it's tracked. It's like it's more paperwork. We track it through the capital account. So right now my capital account is negative, and each year I chip away at it. And so it's not a loan. It's a promise to each other, basically. That's one of the ways we've done it.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah, that's the promissory note is, I guess, one way to structure it too. Yes, it's a different. I'm not getting into that detail in this presentation today, but that's actually a good point. I should have thought about that. But it becomes very detailed and sometimes not easy to understand too. Okay, going back to year 6 to 9, I guess, is where I was. The shared leadership. This is the long middle where the successors are running the day-to-day and the owner is the strategic voice, not the operational one. So critically, the owner reviews annually whether the pace should accelerate. Flexibility here is what keeps the relationship healthy. And then in year 10 plus, the full transfer happens. The remaining 51% transfers. The owner exits operationally. The successors hold 100% of the equity and full leadership responsibility. It's a clean exit. The firm continues, the owner is compensated, the legacy is intact. The 51-49 split during years 5 to 9 is intentional. It's not about distress, it's about protecting the successors as much as the owner. Majority control means the owner can still course correct if something goes wrong in the transition. It also protects the successors from being put in a position they may not be ready for. So here we are looking at diagrams for the equity transfer timeline. I walked through it left to right. So years 1 through 4, the owner holds 100%. The successors are learning, the firm is being valued, and no equity has moved yet. This phase is all about preparation, and it's arguably the most important phase because what happens here determines whether the rest of the plan is possible. In year 5, the first transfer happens. The owner drops to 51% ownership. The successors come in at 49% combined. The seller financing agreement is signed. The successors start co-signing contracts and appearing as principals. This is the moment the transition becomes real, not just a plan on paper. Then in the years 6 to 9, the ownership split holds at 51-49. What changes is the operational reality. The successors are running the firm, the owner is advising. The equity structure gives the owner a backstop. The daily reality gives the successors the experience they need. And then in year 10 plus, the remaining 51% transfers. The owner exits at 0%. Successors are at 100%. The firm may run without the founder, which may be a goal. The founder may continue to work as emissary founder and advisor. Notice that the equity transfer happens in 2 steps, but the authority transfer happens continuously over the full 10 years. Ownership and authority are not the same thing, and conflating them is one of the most common mistakes in succession planning. We are now looking at a synthesis slide, to draw out the bigger lessons, not just to compare 2 firms, but to name the principles that appear to everyone in the room. So there are 2 firms, different sizes, different timelines, different pathways, but the same fundamental challenge. How do you build a firm that can outlast you? And how do you do that in a way that's fair to everyone involved, the owners, the successors, and the staff? So I'll walk you through the key contrasts. On the pathway side, firm A is doing an internal succession over 10 years. Firm B is doing a staged equity transfer. Both are internal, but structured rather differently. So the pathway has to fit your situation. When it comes to equity transfer, Firm A transfers on retirement, a more traditional structure, while Firm B starts transferring minority equity in year 5, while the owner retains control. It's more innovative and increasingly common in small professional service firms. The biggest gap, both firms have the same underlying challenge: successors who need to develop the business side of practice. BD and financial literacy are the gaps in almost every A&D firm I work with. Technical excellence is not the bottleneck. Business acumen is. So the first step for firm A, confirm who the candidates are and commission evaluation. For firm B, assign titles and start mentoring now and not starting next quarter. The first step is always the same. Make the plan specific enough that it's harder to defer than not to do. So which of these firms does yours look more like right now? And what's the one thing you'd do differently if you knew you had a decade? Anybody wants to share? Can go in the chat or go live.
Well, this is Jeannie. My firm would be more like firm B.
Okay.
And again, business development is probably the biggest stumbling block.
So there's a lot of training necessary on the business development side. Okay,
Right.
good. That is doable. It is doable.
Jeannie, can I ask you, why do you think your firm looks more like firm B? Is it just based on scale?
Yes, I'm a sole proprietor with a project manager and backup drafting.
Okay.
So Elizabeth, I'm more firm A. I'm with BA Collective in Santa Monica, and we have 25 people, 4 partners, and we've been in this now for a year, probably year 6. And I'm the last partner that was brought in.
Okay.
And BD is definitely the issue, especially with the economy.
Okay. Yeah.
But we do have another layer of sort of junior partners that we're considering. But the valuation is one thing we just can't, we haven't gotten around. And I think that is just seeing your presentation reiterates how critical that is.
Do you have on the business development side, do you have staff on the administrative side and on the administrative side that is designated to marketing and business development?
So this last year, we got all of our pieces in place. Last year we had a great year, which allowed us the financial flexibility to bring those people in. And so this year, our focus is really putting that engine in place. And so we're hoping that this year can be the year where we turn BD into less burden on the founding partner and that it's more that dispersed.
Right. Yeah, because again, as I tried to make the case early on, it is very important to have a brand that is consistent so that in a way the firm appears as one entity and not just like people working for a founder. So each part of the firm is part of that system and represents the system, the brand. So there's a lot of effort in my experience necessary to make that messaging consistent so that everyone can act as an ambassador and do business development and do it at the level that you're comfortable with, because each of us has a different way of how we like to interact with people. And so you can create plans specific to each individual.
Elizabeth, that's a good point because we actually changed our name from Bellsberg Architects to be a collective in order to do that, in order to create a unique identity for the new partners.
But then you have to probably do a lot of client work to convince them that they get the same quality of work with a new name and less possibly of the individual that they even initially were drawn to hire.
I think that hasn't been a problem because of our portfolio. We've just had a really consistent portfolio. So I don't think that's ever been an issue. It's, again, like everyone said, it's never the work, it's getting the work. That's always been the hardest. He is a very charismatic founder, and throwing him in front of people is often helpful, but he's been gracious about putting the younger folks forward and trying to step back when he can. And so that's been helpful.
Awesome. Awesome.
Elizabeth, I've heard it said that firms that use the founder's last name are initially more successful, but more difficult to transition. Does that seem like what you've experienced?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm 10 years in business, and I did a survey early on brand and naming, and I observed that a lot of the younger firms intentionally chose not to put their names, their first or last names, as part of the brand, but find names that let the whole team be feel like identify with it. So it has been very successful, I think. I think that the name on the door part is more like the firms that are 20 to 50 years in practice, I think, or even longer. But I think everybody that is less than 20 years in business most likely has gravitated towards not using their name in the brand.
I also think that legacy farms, mine's 17 years old and my name is on the board, is on the wall. I'm finding competitors that are old school, like myself, that when the new team takes over and rebrands, your website, your email, everything is forwarded to the new name anyway. So it's a little easier than it used to be to recover from a brand change when your name is on the wall. So I'm actually promoting in my looking for a candidate that I want you to change the name. Even though Shannon Lee carries a lot in my industry, um, because technology is so favorable to just send them, if you write down Shannon Lee looking for them, it's going to go straight to the new, round hole name or whatever the new name is. So I think it's easier than it used to be.
I see. Yeah.
When
I mean, I see that firms tend to rebrand at least with a refresh of the website every 5 years, more or less. Is it a name change every time? Probably not, but
No.
a look at least, yes, does come every 5 years that to stay contemporary.
All right, I gotta ask the dumb question. Do we talk about the range of valuations?
Yes.
Sure.
But I'm asking you,
Oh,
what is the range of valuations? Is it
okay.
multiple of,
I have been doing valuations for firms I work with, even though I'm not a certified firm, I guess, to do that. Um, there are strict formulas behind it, how you go about that. And it has to do with the book value of the firm on the balance sheet. It has to do with your revenues and how much you have on your forecast, how much staff you have. And it's literally just plugging in numbers, honestly. But the basic rule of thumb that still counts as a just rough outline is that each staff, let's say you have a firm with 20 people, like the firm A, each staff is worth about 70 to 85,000. So multiply that. So basically between 1.4 and 1.8 or 1.9 million, I guess, is the value of the firm. And if you spread that amongst 5 people, each would have to pay 1/5 of that over whatever period, however long period you decide. That value gets often inflated or should get inflated, assuming the firm is growing by 2 to 3% at the very least over the years. So that value goes up as a kind of escalated way as well.
Elizabeth, are you saying about billable staff members?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Are you, when you say staff members, because we have 2 that are administrative and we have 6 that are billable, are you talking about the billable and not the administrative? I
I
think
would say everybody that is on your fixed payroll. And if you have contractors, if they're kind of close to full time, you can count them as well. As long as they are part of the business, whether they generate revenues or help support the team that generates revenue, it counts both.
okay.
Yeah. So the 5-person firm, I would say, is between 350 and 450,000 worth, most likely, without even having looked at the balance sheet or the profit and loss statement, assuming though that the firm is profitable and doesn't have debt on the balance sheet. Once you have debt on the balance sheet, because your book value automatically goes down or is even possibly negative. It's not as good of a starting point. Because I've seen firms taking on debt to get through the pandemic, and some of them are still paying off that debt now, even 5 years later, because the first couple of years were maybe not as successful, right, coming out of it. I can only encourage you to make sure that you do work to get your debt off your books.
So I have a question. When you're valuing it per employee, does that account also for like equipment, furniture, et cetera, et cetera?
So that's what is in the book value. So basically your balance sheet should list if there is any value that is in terms of fixed assets in the firm, it reflects in the balance sheet. So that's the fair book value. It's a number that gets used as a baseline, and then you add on to that value for how much revenues you had on average over the last 5 years, how much profit you had on average over the last 5 years, and how much do you have in your forecast in contract looking out for the next 12 months. Again, it's a formula, and it takes a certain percentage of each of these numbers, and it's what is called weighted, meaning the year closest to today has a heavier weight than the 4 or 5 years back, but it does count towards it to some extent.
So the basics are the employee equivalent and your profit.
The employee value is more like an other approach, which is a really very rough rule of thumb. And the approach with the book value and revenues, forecast, and profit is the more precise approach, and it's different. They're not so the employee value does not get plugged into the kind of other approach. It's more like it's two different approaches I'm talking about.
Okay.
And it's very, very raw, I would say, or very rough. It's not very precise. Don't
Right.
hold me, don't get a valuation and say, but Elisabeth said that.
No, that serves a purpose, just having a rough estimate.
It's a rough estimate, a starting point, just to get a magnitude sense going, if you will. Yes.
Right. Thank you.
All right, so the torch doesn't have to be dropped. Handled with intention, transitioned isn't the end of the firm spirit. It's how the firm spirit grows beyond you. So what we talked about today is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one. If something landed for you today and you'd like to think through it more systematically for your firm, I'd be glad to continue that conversation. It's a 30-minute clarity call. You just, I sent out a link of the recording by the end of the day or tomorrow. Just respond to that and we can take it from there. Thank you for attending today. Don't forget to take the first few steps towards a decision you have been deferring. You wrote it down, the 90-day plan. And if you have more questions, we have like 2 or 3 more minutes. More than happy to take it now, or like I said, in a follow-up conversation.
Well, I think we should pitch our firms to each other. If anyone wants a wayfinding firm in the Northern California with 9 employees, we're looking for a transition strategy.
Well, I'm in Berkeley, so I'm Northern California based, and
Great.
I do a lot of these events. So more than happy to continue the dialogue via the events as well, if you're comfortable with that.
Shannon, a friend of mine owns a firm here in LA that might be interested. We should talk.
Great. And
I'll put in the chat my email.
wonderful. Thank you.
You bet.
right, give it a minute to get the email contacts exchanged.
Shannon, I would think your firm, because it's more specialized, might be tastier to somebody wanting to acquire it.
Well, it's interesting, and I just need to, really get it moving. Like Elisabeth said, you always wait too long. It can be a specialty part of an architecture firm. Many architecture firms try and do this internally, and so it is a little bit of a asset for that. It's also part signage firms that want to do design build.
Mhm.
It's also a good fit in that regard. And again, just being around for a long time where everybody seems to know you and you have a lot of institutional clients. And obviously, I'm a salesperson, so the BD part of it is the most desirable part, I think.
Have you talked to other environmental graphics firms?
I have, well, you have to be careful.
Okay, I'm sure
and-
you did. Okay.
Yeah, and I kind of put it out in the universe. I'm not real deliberate about it, but everybody knows that, I'm in my early 60s and it's inevitable. So, anyway, it's an interesting time in our crazy economy. So, I think there are opportunities for all of us as long as we think good thoughts and have hope and try and find those hidden entrepreneurs. I think the biggest mistake people make is thinking that an architect or a designer even wants or can run a business. It's just not for everybody. So I think we have to kind of not expect that it's always trainable. Some people just can't take the accountability and the stress. Or do they know how to sell anything?
All right. I thank everybody again for joining me today. Let's stay in touch. I have another presentation in 2 months about financial management, so you can also join me then, or reach out to me as a follow-up to today. Thank you again and have a great
So
day.
one more question. Will the slides be printable?
I
Or
have to think about that, whether I share the slides. I will share the link to the recording for sure.
oh, that would be good. Okay.
Shows the slides on screen. Do you have an interest in having the slides? I think I will send it to you. Okay.
All right. That'll be great. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Very good.
Thank
See you
you.
soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.